Panasonic just announced two new full-frame mirrorless cameras. They have 24 or 47 megapixels, depending on the model. And the big news, they do 4K at 60 frames a second. They also have two card slots, so they filling in the gaps where Canon and Nikon didn't. First, if you want to win, not this camera, but a Canon EOS R or Fujifilm X-T3, go to freesdp.com right now. And also subscribe to see our full review of these two cameras, as well as the Nikon Z7 versus the EOS M. We get the Z7 tomorrow. The X-T3 versus the World, and the DJI Mavic 2 drone. First, the S1 has 24 megapixels, while the S1R has 47 megapixels. 47 megapixels, they kind of prices righted Canon and Nikon, right? Because Nikon has a 45 megapixel sensor. Sony put out a 42 megapixel sensor, and Panasonic is like, we're going to beat the hell out of you. 47 megapixels. I have a theory that Panasonic is using the exact same two sensors that are in the Nikon Z6 and Z7. How would they get more megapixels if the Z7 is 45? Well, the Z7's effective megapixel count is 45.7, whereas the Z7's total megapixel count, same for the D850, is 46.89 megapixels. So the Z7 is almost 47 megapixels. Now, the difference between effective and total megapixels, when sensors have a different effective and total megapixel count, that means the edges of the sensor are kind of covered up. And they use these sensors, these pixels at the border of the sensor to detect the amount of like background read noise. So if you're taking night photography pictures, they can read those edge sensors to determine just how much read noise is in there and then subtract it out from the rest of the pixels in the sensor. It's a clever thing that reduces the amount of noise, but also reduces the effective megapixels of the camera. My theory is Panasonic is using the same sensor. They're just not covering up the edges of the frame so that they can up their megapixel count by just a little bit. Here we see a couple of pictures of the grip and the rear part of the camera. This is the best we have right now. Panasonic really didn't give us much to work on, and this is just a snapshot of their slide from Photokina. But we can see it has a nice deep grip. It's certainly deeper than, say, the X-T3, and in fact, the body looks an awful lot like the Nikon Z7, even the kind of bulbous hump in the middle. That LCD screen to me, though, it looks like an 80s LCD screen. And Panasonic, you can't do this to me now. Nikon came out with that beautiful top screen. Canon's got a beautiful screen on it. You can't do this. Fuji has a beautiful screen. If it looks like an 80s Casio watch, we're all going to be disappointed. Durability without compromise. This camera, they're bragging about the weather sealing and the cold weather abilities. And okay, we'll take your word for it. I believe it. My GH4s survived a massive rainstorm that destroyed two Canon 5Ds. So I've always trusted those Panasonics. They have an XQD and an SD card, and if this is like the GH5, you'll be able to write not just stills, but video to both of them. This asymmetry here is interesting. It means if you want to, say, shoot sports at a high frame rate, you'll be using the XQD, and then the SD card will be backup. Sometimes you'll be using a JPEG backup and a RAW to the primary card. That's common when you're forced to use asymmetrical cards like this. It is an interesting choice. The fact that they're using an XQD indicates to me that they might be planning on having a high frame rate with that 47 megapixel camera, because you would need a very fast card in order to shoot 47 megapixels at a high frame rate, or else everything gets really, really slow, kind of like the A7R III does. That has a 3-axis tilty screen. This is my biggest disappointment with the camera. Here's why. This is the GH5. And you can see the screen flips forward. And this is really important if you shoot YouTube videos, right? Every vlogger needs to be able to film themselves sometimes, at least, and that means you need to be able to see yourself. And that's why the GH5 has been such a hit. At least it's a key part of why it's been such a hit. But it's not just vloggers nowadays, right? Because if you look at travel photography, even regular photography, the photographer is more and more often the focal point in these pictures. And photographers need to be able to include themselves in the stories that they tell, because part of what people love about photography is the storytelling. The difference between a print that sells for $20,000 and a print that sells for $20 is the persona of the photographer often. So if we give that up by not telling our own stories as photographers, we lose out. And that's why I'm so disappointed that Panasonic instead chose to include a 3-axis tilty screen. And this beautiful X-T3 here happens to have a 3-axis tilty screen, so I can kind of demonstrate it. Like, one axis here is tilting up, and another axis is tilting down, and then the third axis is tilting to the side. And that is useful because it allows you to hold the camera down low or over your head and still see it. But why not a flippy screen? Seriously, I've loved the flippy screens on every GH camera up until now. Big disappointment. If it's not too late to change it, okay, you got a couple of months before this is coming out. Please give me a flippy screen. We all want it. Another big disappointment, contrast autofocus. That means not phase detect autofocus. And my single biggest concern with Panasonic and Olympus with their Micro Four Thirds system was that they hadn't developed phase detect autofocus. That has set Sony apart from all the other mirrorless competition. They have amazing phase detect autofocus that works like a DSLR. But contrast AF is always going to be a little bit slower unless Panasonic actually makes good on this deep learning AI promise. I've heard so many tech companies promise artificial intelligence, and it's become this cheesy buzzword to me, so I take this with a grain of salt. But maybe the AI is actually onto something. I mean, come on. Artificial intelligence requires massive kind of quantum computing levels, and I don't think they're going to be sticking this in the S1. Dual image stabilization, which means it will have sensor stabilization, which the Nikon Z7 has, which the A7R III has. But dual means that it will talk to the lens and coordinate the image stabilization. And this works extremely well on the GH5. That means that we can handhold video and have it look like a tripod, genuinely. Like, if you're good at handholding, you can make it look exactly like a tripod. That is cool. However, at the moment, they haven't even announced that any of their lenses have image stabilization, and none of the existing lenses for the system have image stabilization. So we'll see how it works in actual practice. They also bragged about having a higher sync speed than any other camera. Sync speed, if you're using flash, it means you don't have to put the flash into high-speed sync mode. This is not a big deal for most people, but it's a good thing. And they also bragged about having vaguely the highest resolution electronic viewfinder. And okay, they didn't say what it was going to be, but yeah, sharper is better. That means I think the SL from Leica has a 4 million pixel EVF, so it'll be something over that. There are a lot of questions that remain to be answered. Frames per second, what's it going to be? They really need to be coming in at 10 frames a second just to compete with the Sony A7R III and Nikon Z7. So I hope we're going to see 10 frames per second on both cameras. The buffer, that remains to be seen. Please don't cheap out on the buffer because it gets really frustrating when your buffer fills up. Whether they have eye detect autofocus, this has become a big differentiator. So right now, Sony has by far the best eye detect autofocus, so let's hope that they all keep that up. If they have it, that is a big advantage. So get to work on that. The controls remain to be seen too. We're already disappointed with the tilty screen rear view, but do the buttons depress well? Does the touchscreen actually work well? We'll see. And the biggest question for me is the video crop. It's not a given that 4K at 60 frames a second is going to be full width, especially on their 47 megapixel camera. In fact, nothing like that has ever been done. Panasonic's existing 4K 60 cameras read out at 1:1. They have lower megapixel sensors. If you were to try to do a one-to-one readout on a 47 megapixel camera, you'd be looking at like beyond a 2x crop. Basically, you'd be going back to a Micro Four Thirds size sensor, seriously, and that would be kind of unusable. But I predict that this is what's going to happen. There's going to be some kind of video crop at 4K 60. I predict 4K 30 will be full width or close to full width. But 4K 60, I think that's going to be a massive amount of number crunching, especially on the 47 megapixel camera. Maybe they'll be able to do 4K 60 full width on the 24 megapixel S1, but I would be shocked if they manage to do it on the S1R. I'll keep my fingers crossed, but don't get your hopes up about the S1R having full width at 4K 60. Nobody's done it before. It would require, the thermal is going to be a problem. It's going to be generating a lot of heat. They've not announced the prices, but here's where I think they need to be. I think the S1 needs to come in at about $2,400. That's 20% more than the $2,000 Sony A7 III, But if it offers 4K 60, that could be enough reason to get people to move over. The S1R can come in at about $3,400. That's a little bit more than the A7R3. It's the same price as the Nikon Z7, but it's a brand new system. They don't have an established full frame lineup of lenses that they can adapt. So I don't think it's going to quite be able to compete on par with those two cameras. Those should come in a little bit less expensive, but we'll see. They're expected in early 2019. That's very vague. There's not a date or a month. That means it's going to vary a lot. That means we probably won't be seeing these cameras for 6 months. That means I probably wouldn't make any of your buying decisions based on this. We also don't know if they're going to be good at all. They might not. They could get pushed back further. So please, if you're dying for some new camera, well, don't let me push you into getting it, but I wouldn't change your buying decisions about this. Let's talk about the lenses. These cameras use the relatively new L mount. This is a system that Leica developed that supports both APS-C and full frame lenses. That Leica developed them for their TL and SL cameras, and they will indeed use those same Leica lenses, and we'll talk about what lenses exist currently. Panasonic announced 3 lenses for this new mount. 50 f1.4, which is kind of standard. It looks big, so I presume that means good quality. They also announced what's become a very typical 24-105 zoom. Both Canon and Sony currently offer these. They didn't mention the aperture, which is real weird. It's real weird. Like, they're not far enough along in the planning to figure out the aperture for this lens? It's standard that a 24-105 is an f4 lens, but it could be f3.5 to f5.6. I don't know. And the telephoto zoom, again, the standard here would be f2.8, but we don't know. This could be an f4 lens, or maybe they'll go for and do something variable aperture, but it's probably time to make your mind up, guys. There are some existing lenses in addition to those. Leica has 3 L zooms that are currently available for sale. They're all really expensive. You can see they have a 16-35, a 24-90, and a 90-280, but they're all over $5,000, and that is way out of the ballpark when you compare them to Sony, Canon, Nikon. The primes, Leica also has 3 primes that are currently for sale. These are just the lenses I could actually find for sale. At the normal and short portrait ranges, one of them competes directly with the Panasonic. I'm confident the Panasonic is going to be less than $5,000. That 50 f1.4 should come in at $1,500 max. So there's also a series of adapters that you can get that should work, that would allow you to put your Canon and Leica and Nikon lenses onto these bodies. These adapters, they're also coming in at Leica prices, so I would assume that third parties would start to make these, and maybe even Panasonic will make some that will bring these prices way, way down, because adapters should cost like $250 and not $800. And Panasonic said that they will have 10 lenses within 1 year of launch, which means by early 2020 they'll have 10 lenses. But they didn't give us a roadmap beyond that. Panasonic is also bringing their Lumix Pro program worldwide. Pro services are a key part of how we work. If something breaks, I can contact Nikon, Canon, or Sony, who all have pro services, and they will ship me a replacement. They'll ship me a loaner overnight. They will get it fixed ASAP and send me back my original gear. And that means if you have a fault with something, you can switch to your backup body and keep shooting, but then get your primary body back really as early as the next day. And to pros, this is a really vital part of how we work. What's happening with Micro Four Thirds? Is Panasonic abandoning them? I predict that they will abandon them soon. Because it would be ridiculous for Panasonic to be sort of developing these 2 systems simultaneously. It's not that they could do that, but they would only be putting half their energy into the new system, and I think they should go all into one system. But they did announce a new Micro Four Thirds lens, and it's one that I'm actually really interested in, the 10-25 f1.7. So this is going to be equivalent to a 20 to 50 millimeters f3.4 full frame lens, which is better than we have now. Right now, we've been using this setup here, which is the Panasonic GH5 with a Sigma 18-35 and a speed booster. And that comes in at an f1.1, like a physical f1.1 with the speed booster. So it wouldn't give me the same results, but if it had actual native Panasonic focusing and functionality, that would be a big step forward for the way that we work, It's not stabilized, but you still have the sensor stabilization. This is something that didn't exist. So it's completely unfair to be complaining about what it doesn't do, right? But I'm going to do that anyway. I can't believe they didn't put phase detect autofocus in it. This could be a complete deal breaker. The reason that we don't use the GH5 as much as we could is because it doesn't grab onto my faces. If you try to autofocus on a moving subject with the GH5 and then you switch over to the Canon EOS R there, the Canon EOS R is our main vlogging camera, and it's only 1080 at full width, but that's still what we use because it works. It gets our faces in focus all the time, and it doesn't matter if you got 4K 60 if it's out of focus because your shot is lost. There's no flippy screen, which is a heartbreaker for so many GH5 users. I still can't believe nobody's putting live streaming in these real cameras. We live stream all the time, including right this moment. And the new GoPros live stream, my phone can live stream, my Yi action camera can live stream, my DJI drones, they can all live stream. But these new video-centric cameras cannot live stream. What is going on? Get with the program, guys. No GPS that they announced, and no wow. Like when Canon came out and they announced the EOS R, they gave us a couple of wow lenses, the 50 f1.2, the 28-70 f2, the little multifunction bar that made us like, that's really interesting. Where is the wow with this? All they kind of did was, oh, we're keeping up. And also here's 4K 60. We don't know what the crop is. And yeah, all the cameras should have had 4K 60. So I guess their wow is 4K 60. Nonetheless, we're excited to see it. It doesn't blow my mind, but I'm glad that it's here, and I'm glad there's going to be some more competition, and this will help push Sony, Canon, and Nikon further. Be sure to subscribe our full review. Check out freesdp.com to win the Canon EOS R or Fuji X-T3. And if you have any follow-up questions or corrections, add a comment down below. If I made a mistake, I will pin a comment. So read the pinned comment before you get